Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, John Chi. In our last episode, we spoke with Mike Stadnisky about his childhood exposure to business and science, his time working for Red Bull as an undergrad, going to UVA for grad school, and the positive lab experiences he had there. If you missed it, be sure to go back and give part 1 a listen. We continue our conversation in part 2, covering his transition from academia to business, learning about business development, understanding the complexity of finding decision makers, and the importance of differentiating between decision makers and champions in business partnerships.
So after your time in grad school, and you're talking about, having that FlowJo hat on, how did you get drawn to FlowJo as a place that you would want to work at?
So I finally started pulling my shit together on my career hunt. Way too late. So I did, luckily my PI would have me around for another year, doing, just because, and we went on a large, what would now be called multi-omics study, but back then it was just sort of crushing data together, and so I helped him run that study, and I was actually analyzing the data, but I was trying to put multiple, beyond just flow, put multiple types of multi-omics data into FlowJo. So I was essentially hacking FlowJo to be able to do this data visualization. Because I was like, we want a gate, we want a bin, we want to analyze this data. Anyway, as an aside, it wasn't like, it wasn't like there's a light shining down. I was like, you're going to work for FlowJo? That was not how it went. I started doing these informational interviews, which are another, the second piece of graduate student, career advice I would give somebody is dude, every time someone mentioned networking when I was getting a PhD, I would roll my eyes so hard to get hit. Man, I was so wrong. I was so freaking wrong, John. I was so wrong. And now, when I get a graduate student on the phone, where I'm like, hey, reach out to me, I evangelize to them. And I'm like, use me. People that I know, I will intro you, right? There's this notable experience I had where this guy finally took me up on this offer. And he was a graduate student he was an undergrad and then a graduate student in this exact same lab. And he's like, oh, I applied for this job, blah, blah, blah. I said, I know the hiring manager. Oh, that's great. I said, no. I'm going to message him and you're going to get that job. That's literally how this works. It doesn't work in any other, I applied online. Nope, doesn't matter. I'm throw in the shredder, right? It's kind of like that meme where something comes off the printer and in the shredder. Graduate students and postdocs, listen to me. That meme is what happens with your resume when you apply for something online and you don't know anybody, okay? And it's the same thing. Even people like John and I are like, oh, look at your resume, cool. And I've hired people blindly before, sure, but I promise you that in these large things that you're trying to get into, it's just printed into the
right into the bin
immediately. They're like, oh, cool. And I actually learned that from Genentech, who was pretty much like, oh, hey, we get 4,000 applicants for every intern spot. And I was like, what? And they're like, if we don't have somebody reach out to us, we're just not even going to look at it. It's like, holy smokes. So anyway, I did these informational interviews. I started ruling out the things I didn't want to do, right? There's things that look real shiny when you're in school, right? Including being an academic PI. You're like, yeah, I can do this. I can go do the postdoc. But you go through biotech postdoc, you go through am I going to work in the patent space? And then of course, because you're good at school, you're like, should I go back to school for something that's going to make money?
When you said patent, remember the tie? It was a law firm.
Oh man.
I was like, I'm doing the patent thing. And I was like, oh God. No, I love my patent folks. Not saying every patent firm is like that, but mine was.
Oh, I get it, man. But they're buttoned up people, right? And it's also yeah, you got to figure. I think the other insight you're sharing there is that you're going to find a kind of culture you're also going to fit in personally, right? That career. It's not every career has a culture, but it needs to fit you where you are, and you're like, I'm not doing that. That's good. That's valuable to you. It's not like you end up. There's plenty of people, and I know them too. They end up doing something for 20 years, and they're just it's kind of well, I was just doing this to pay the bills, right? And look, that's fine, I get it, but you didn't get a PhD because you want to pay the bills. I can promise you that. I mean, you just told me, John just told me that he couldn't pay his bills. So obviously he didn't do it to pay the bills, right? For some other reason. And like, if you've spent, call it 27 years of your life, like in school, and then all of a sudden you give that up, go like, well, like there was a lot invested in you until this point. Now you got to give me the yuppie Nuremberg excuse. Like, I don't think this will work. God, man, we got off topic. But so anyway, so informational interviews, highly recommend them. Reach out to the alumni, like just be pushy, right? If someone showed me what a CRM was, like when I was doing this career thing, oh my God, John, I'm like, it would have blown my mind. Like, oh, hey, you need to follow up with this person. I'd be like, oh, I don't want to be too pushy. No, you need to follow up with this person. They're busy. They're not ignoring you. They're busy and they're distracted, right? That's why for every consumer company that you ever sign up for their email list, they're emailing you every single day. They're trying to create mind share, right? It's the same thing with your career thing. So get these people on the phone, say you're going to talk to them for 20 minutes. If it goes well, you'll be talking to them for more than 20 minutes. Figure out what you don't want to do and figure out at least some region of what you do want to do. That helped me kind of figure out how things were going. And then oddly enough, I mean, I knew that I wanted to work in flow. There was something about flow cytometry, right? Which sounds like there's something about Mary, but like there was something about flow cytometry was like, I'm either going to go work in a core, I'm going to go run a core. I interviewed for all these jobs, or I interviewed with at that time an independent MedImmune, for one of their translational roles, which is obviously it was like a 90% flow job, right? And so I was like, man, I just am so fired up about what we could do with this tech. As it turns out, my wife actually ended up with a job offer in the middle of nowhere, Oregon, like quite literally middle of nowhere, Oregon. And I was like, what are we gonna do anywhere near this spot? I mean, and it turns out that the company that was selling and working on FlowJo was actually headquartered. It had been moved out of Stanford, and it was in a very small town in Southern Oregon, just over the California, called Ashland, Oregon, which is known mostly for a Shakespeare Festival in the Northwest, right? And I was like, no way. So it's pretty much like, hey, let's just go. Like, it was kind of like, let's just go look. Okay, like you go, you're gonna interview for your job. I'm gonna go up over the hill, and I'm gonna go spend a week in Ashland with these people. We'll just kind of like honestly see what happens, right? Like there was no position that was advertised. It was like kind of like an interview, but I didn't know what the heck was like. I didn't know. Like, and I didn't even know how those interactions were supposed to go because
I didn't either.
Right? Like we didn't know. It's like grad schools, they don't teach you how to be hired. Like,
no, I didn't know what to wear. I didn't have any. I joke. I was like, that was almost like literally just had a ill-fitting suit, like that was just like way too big, like had clown shoes on basically, and rolling up like.
Yeah, you remember, like you and I were the guys who, like most people were like, how do you create a resume, not a CV? Where you send somebody like you're a graduate student, you're like, I just got a PhD, I have a 6-page CV. So you're like, what? Why? You're like, sorry, because that's all. Like literally, that's all I know. Like, that's all. Like, do you want my thesis? Because I don't know anything else. Like, this is it. So I've seen for 6 years. Yeah. So I ended up spending a week with the FlowJo team. And with one of the two founders, and they were like, man, it would be great if we could get an application scientist, someone who really, really knows tech, and have them sit literally on our engineering team, because it was a pretty small software engineering group at that time. There were 16 people, and I guess about half of them would have been software engineers. And it was like a good job offer, and then my wife ended up receiving kind of a gnarly job offer, where it's pretty much like you were going to be on call all the time, and for reasons that are kind of hard to even discern now. I just told her, look, don't take that job, but I really want to take this job with FlowJo, and we're going to move to essentially a part of the country where you've never been. Like she didn't spend a minute in Ashland. The first time she actually ever saw the town was actually in a documentary about ultra running. That we saw, I think 2 weeks before we packed up everything in a car and drove us and our dog across the entire country. And I was like, this is what we're gonna do. Like, and it's amazing that she took that risk. I mean, I think in retrospect, it's like, what the heck was she thinking? But I was like, there's a there, right? And I was passionate about Flow, I was passionate about FlowJo, and someone was offering me more, at that time, way more money than I was making in graduate school, right? And I was like, let's give this a rip. And as an aside, it's also that, frankly, like, the trail running there was amazing. And I was a big trail runner, gotten big into it. I'd already run a couple of ultra marathons, and you could literally leave your house and you'd be on a hundreds of miles trail system, right? You could run on the Pacific Crest. I mean, so that was also enticing to me, right? I was like, wow, I could do that too. Look, we always wanted all our thing. And so just took that risk and made that leap.
Very cool. And I when you talk about, significant others, like, just being willing to be supportive and make that sacrifice, I'm like, every time I think about Chloe, I'm like, holy crap. Like, thank you. Like, because we were in the trenches and you brought me out of the trenches. And I think that's something for entrepreneurship, broadly speaking, that I don't know, I don't hear it all too often, is the importance of, like, your significant other being, like, on the same page. They're on the same, in the same car as you, like, and if they're not, like, that's like, there's like a obstacle coming your way, which could quickly derail whatever venture you're starting. So incredibly grateful for same situation, like, moving across the country to a place that she's never been is quite a leap of faith.
Crazy, right? It seems like illogical, right? And of course, it's one of these things where it's in retrospect, it's like, of course, it's like, no, it's at the time, that's not how it works, right? And I think the other side of it, though, is like, when you are an entrepreneur, or whatever, I mean, CEO, whatever, is like, I think the great advice I got from some folks where I went to this high performance leadership class in the University of Chicago is also like, if you are going to a new place in terms of, like, your personal philosophy or the way you see the world, like, make sure it's not like you don't take them with you, but because that sounds almost like demeaning, but it's more like, make sure you share that as you're going through the journey, right? And I think that's hard, because I think what ends up happening is, like, your relationship is not a dumping ground. It's not like, oh, I'm so stressed. Like, all this stuff sucks. Yes, it's there for listening and for feedback, etc. But it's also there for, like, hey, I'm maturing and I have this new perspective. Am I crazy? Like, because as an entrepreneur or whoever, you spend a lot of time in your own head, right? It is because I think that's the thing, like, you iterate 10 times, like, when someone's like, oh, it's a really good idea, you're like, that's because I've been iterating on it.
Yeah, just like constantly just sharpening this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think they're always the first line for that thought process. And then usually when things go badly, then they're also the first line there. So I think, yeah, again, like, you listen to a lot of, like, you can read all the entrepreneurship blogs and all the podcasts you want to, and it'll, like, we've been through different phases of this, right? We went through the lean startup phase, but, like, maybe, John, at some point, someone will be like, hey, like, we need to go through, like, the human relationship phase, where it's like, your significant other is important, your business partners are important, the first couple of people you hire are important, the mentors that you hire are critically important, your investors are really important. Like, and if all these people are creating value at the same time, guess what? You are going to be successful. And then people are going to be like, oh, wow, John and Mike are geniuses. No, we got really lucky with all the people that were around us. And then we were able to make something of that, right? Like that, we were in a very strong situation, right? To our kind of one of these themes is, like, which we did not sometimes intentionally create, but we got really lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm always highly skeptical when one says, like, I did it on my own. Like, I don't believe it.
No. And you know what, John, this is maybe another time to talk about, like, your peer group and your who you surround yourself with in terms of your close friends. I would put on an almost equal footing, because they will be statistically speaking, they're going to be the strongest influence on you because they create the context around you. But I think that is another aspect that people don't talk about enough, which is, like, particularly, and I think frankly, like, at least from what I see, particularly for people who are entering their mid-career. There's not a whole heck of a lot of focus on like, hey, by the way, like, sure, you need to like take care of yourself, etc. But it's also like, hey, you need to maintain the friendships that you've had and work on them, because your peer group is what got you here. Again, statistically speaking, like, what is it that you're the average of your three closest friends or what have you? Like, that's actually true for what it's worth. And it's really important. Like, these are the people who you want to take on this journey with you. And I think I also like, they're not, it's not as important because you're not like spending day-to-day time with them. They're not a significant other. It's a different status. But like, I think for me, that's also been an aspect that has contributed to it's contributed to, I can point to several specific examples where I had a friend who was, none of these guys were life scientists, right? None of my like very close friends. Doctors, folks who are incredible at sales, et cetera. But at any one time I could reach out to them and be like, hey, I have this specific problem. And like, I know you could probably help me with this. And they've done it. Like, they go out of their way. And they also can understand the personal context of like why it matters so much. Even if, and they're like, I don't understand all that geek shit you do. But what I do know, and they can really help you out there. I think that's another aspect that receives little discussion, but is super critical.
Super critical. And yeah, I when you're talking about like kind of like having to, you have to, it's a conscious effort to maintain those relationships too, as everything gets more complex. You have a family, yada yada. But it's like, if it's like a muscle, if you don't use it or lose it, and you got to like keep working at it as much as like you can kind of fall into the inertia. And just like, for exactly what you're saying, just like always like reminding yourself of like you are like a kind of a product of who you surround yourself with, and it's like so important. And so for FlowJo, you're now you're in there, like, and you're like across the country, you're an academic scientist, you're now in business and a small team. It's like, and I'm going to imagine on a small team you're wearing a ton of hats. Can you talk about that experience, above and beyond, like, just like applying the scientific knowledge and like the other skill sets you learned?
Sure. I mean, I had not developed software to that point. So, I think, you really learn how to like actually engineer a piece of software, I think, is to address a customer need. I think, so like my favorite example is like how we binned data was this massive problem. Like, it wasn't just a visualization problem. It was a scientific problem where people were misclassifying cells because we had, and this is nerdy, but it is what it is. There were tons of cells piling up in the 0th bin. Okay, cool. That's great. And people wrote papers about it, but like, frankly, who gives a shit unless you solve it, and you solve it in a way that people can understand. And so we created a way for people to visualize how their data is being binned. Not like problem solved magic, but like when you can see that you can actually like impact someone's science through software, and you can do that and design a piece of software around that, which is a true need, that's pretty special, right? So I think that was part of it. The other part was increasingly I ended up being essentially the interface between our scientific team, which was all the application scientist force that was spread at that time through really mostly North America and Europe, and kind of home office, right? Like, always tension there, right? Like, we want this done, we want the product to go in this way. Home office maybe has some of their own ideas. How do you get that customer feedback in? And then also increasingly so, mostly because we just frankly had someone who was truly out of their depth, was also cutting my teeth on business development, right? And so at that time, it was a major European partnership that we were sort of trying to reboot and save. And so it ended up being this ever expanding sort of pie, which at that time was really, I didn't know what it was. I did not know that that's what I was looking for. But when I started looking for it, there was, there's more responsibilities you could possibly manage in that business. Also because, the one of the two founders was in that business, really just wanted to just program and tinker and be creative. And I think kind of honestly happened into this, at that time, modestly, but still successful business, as a result of that. Right. And so didn't really want to have the leadership role necessarily. And so, yeah, that's how the responsibilities expanded and kind of took me up to this place where, ended up taking over like the leadership of the company, because it was just like, hey, here's someone who has the skills to be able to do it, has started thinking strategically about where we want to actually take this thing, has some ambition for like, where's this thing going to go beyond just it being a good lifestyle business, and also has a vision for like, hey, how do we serve science through this thing, right? Which was always kind of front and center for what we wanted to do. And I think that's why it was successful, albeit modestly so, until that point.
And you brought up business development, and when I talk to grad students, like it's always like how to break into BD, always. And from your perspective, it sounds like you went into FlowJo and had to figure out BD from scratch. Now looking back on that experience, how would, I guess maybe just to set the table first, what would you define as business development? And then how does a scientist that would make like a grad student break into it?
Yeah, it's such a broad like topic when people are like, I want to do business development. I'm like, what do you even mean, right? Because business development at its highest level is a partnership between two or more parties who are receiving, generally speaking, equal benefit from some relationship and some exchange of assets or selling of assets, right? That is going to benefit both parties. Usually, just for what it's worth, usually there's some asymmetry there, right? If it's not just some sort of OEM or manufacturing partnership, even then, if you think about it, there is kind of some asymmetry there, right? And remember, so like in pharma, that can be licensing with a biotech, and biotech might be like, hey, I need your drug delivery system, right? And there's some partnership that gets formed, and there's some money that changes hands, et cetera. So business development is huge in terms of like the number of verticals you can stack it into. For me in life science, it was always sort of this David and Goliath type interaction where we were always a small company. We're always partnering with a larger company. One of the things I say, much to I think a lot of people's chagrin, because it'll be a startup founder, they'll go meet another startup founder, and they're both like, hey, we're friends, we're in the same thing. Startups don't partner with startups, okay? Let's just get that out of the way right now. They don't. You guys are both too high risk. And frankly, if you're a customer, you're looking at like, okay, it's like when you go into a daycare and you see two toddlers interacting with each other, it's not like that's not like oh, this is a less risk situation than having one toddler. It's not. It's a higher risk.
That imagery was just like really, it's like, oh, that actually might be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, like this could be bad, right? And so kind of like set that aside, where I think I focus in on the kind of the smaller business or the startup partnering, which is also huge. It's one, so like there's actually a couple aspects. There's one, if you're a graduate student and you want to get into business development, first be really good at science, because all of it's going to be based on technology all the time. You can't just have craft science or not understand the science and be able to talk partnering. That's it. So get your PhD and be really sound technically, okay? Because there, at some point, there's going to be a subject matter expert. And if you're full of shit, it's never going to work, okay? That, like, just get your baseline in and worry about business development later, okay? The second aspect of this is always partner with a larger company that's going to offer you something asymmetric. And I bring that asymmetry up again, because if it is something that you're saying, hey, look, we don't have a sales force. We've got great tech. We know we've got this consumable stream. But what we want to do is commercialize this. What we really need is a distribution partner. Boom. Okay, you have just condensed the whole universe, and you've identified exactly what you want. And there's probably going to be, 3 to 4 companies who you respect, because you've already talked to your customers about that, by the way, who you're going to go out and start forming relationships with. And we can talk about the block and tackling, how you do that, because a lot of times when I get founders on the phone, they're beating their heads against their laptop and saying like, oh, how do I do that? We'll get into that. But and the aspect for graduate students here, or anybody who's doing business development, is that start with that value creation thesis and share it with the people that you are talking to. Okay. And I do this, I make this such a disciplined thing now when I coach and teach business development, because most people, what they do, this is 99% of people, no matter how smart they are. Here's all of our wares, right? It's going like a bazaar, right? Like, we do this, we're great at this. Here's our team, we're amazing. Like, we all went to Harvard and MIT and like blah, 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 we're geniuses. And our tech is like the greatest thing since sliced white bread. And then they get to the very end of the hour when people are already worried about the next thing and they're like, we want to do this. They've already moved on, nobody gives a shit. So look, take what you want to do, make it the second or third slide of what you're going to say. Because it's just, attention is limited. So you say, hey, I'm from company X. We do Y, X, Y, Z. By the way, if you can't do an elevator pitch, find another job. Like, be able to summarize it really quick and then say, hey, the reason that I'm here today, and I'm going to get this out of the way right now, is this. And make it very clear. Like, here's the value proposition to you. This is why we're doing this. Is the value proposition to us. We think there's something, we think there's a there, and then go into the rest of your credibility stuff and your technical stuff. The number of times that I've done this and then had people propose what I've already proposed back to me, which is a measure of their listening. It's not a measure of like magic. It's like, oh yeah, I see what you're saying. And thus, and then you bring it back around and you plan for a shorter talk than an hour, right? This is not your research in progress talk for all your PIs and PhD students, okay? And you bring that exact same slide, not different slide, that exact same slide, and you leave it up. And that is what you're talking about. If you do that and you've done enough homework to know that proposal fits into their strategy and fits into what they want to do, and it's going to be received correctly because you got to do that. You got to do that homework. Now you're doing business development. It doesn't matter what time business development you're doing. That's like the recipe for success for doing business development. And then you can move on, like, again, more block and tackling aspects of like, who do I need to talk to? How do I get a proposal going, etc. But like that for any business development relationship is to me is the frame of mind that people need to be in.
And that's spot on. And I love for I guess my style too is like I do an abundant amount of homework on who's like the counterparty and what they're basically just like try to know them as close as I can, like as much as possible, what priorities they have, what are they incentivized by, and really scoping that out before the present. Because like if you don't understand that, you know, your slide's going to fall flat. The ask is like going to be kind of like misaligned, or maybe it just kind of you're just meandering and you're not really hitting what they actually care about. And for my just like sometimes I think BD and sales kind of get smushed together, but you know it's like it has sales elements. You kind of like gotta sell the thing, but it's not just like, hey, here's my good, buy it. Especially when you're trying to structure a working with the big, with the big dogs.
Look, it's big game hunting, right? I mean, that's what you're doing, right? So you spend a lot of time preparing, right? And I think I would take what you said and I can phrase it another way, which is that if you are successful, the negotiation has started. So you better know who you're dealing with. And to your point, like, why would they do this at all? And is it a fit? I'll take it one step further, John, because we're having fun on this topic. Every organization has a way that they say things, and it's publicly available, and most people don't take advantage of this, right? I called this like semantic hacking for the longest time, but like if you listen to an earnings call and you hear a phrase or you see it in the slides and you're like, oh, I haven't heard that before, it's possible that that's unique to their culture. Use it, because now you're speaking their language quite literally, right? That's really important. And by the way, like, again, because the companies that you will be pitching, partnering, blah, 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 the likelihood that they're public is very high, because so guess what? Like, if you go in a meeting with a public company and you haven't looked at their quarterly earnings report, their presentation, you haven't listened to that, good luck. Like, it's all out there, buddy. Like, it's all out there. And people are like, oh, you don't need to know what's on their balance sheet, but you damn well need to know what their business units are. You need to know what their strategy is. And this, by the way, this should just be like fun stuff. Like, it's a good way of learning the business. And by the way, it's also a really good way. This is kind of another aspect. It's a good way to, as a PhD student or anybody that's trying to transfer into business. It doesn't actually matter. It doesn't matter if it's a student, grad student. It could be someone who's already already working in biotech. The fastest way of learning business is starting to listen and consume that material, because you're getting reps and you're understanding the vernacular, right? It's kind of like we were making dendritic cell jokes earlier, right? Like, that plays well with an immunology crowd. But like, what if I start making like deferred revenue jokes, right? Like, be able to speak that is really important. And I think, so there's kind of two aspects there, which is one is like, you can do a lot to figure out how that organization thinks about things. Like, I worked with a very large sequencing company, and they were very, very focused on go-to-market. All the time, it came up in every conversation. So if you don't think I'm not saying that all the time when I'm talking to them and negotiating with them, you're wrong. Like, that's not like a unique phrase. It's just something is front and center. and it's something that is obviously critical path for them, sure. And as a small company, it costs you nothing.
It's so crazy. I'm seeing the parallel to like the Red Bull experience. It's like care before sharing. Like care. Like, and it's like it costs you nothing. Well, I guess like an internet, you gotta pay for Comcast or whatever. But just like go see what they care, like figure it out, like dig in, like give a shit a little bit.
What's the worst that happens, right? You learn a lot about this business and you figure out they're the wrong one to partner with. Like that's how you do it. And I think it's not obfuscated to me now how quickly you could learn like the business side, right? Because a lot of people will tell you in your case, you can't do business. It's wrong. It's just, what do you want to do with that, and how do you want to learn? Like, how do you break into business development? There's your answer, right? I mean, heck, if you're going to the pharma biotech side, it's even easier. They're like, we are looking for assets in these categories.
Yeah, they spell it. They survive on it too. They're like, no, please.
It's Mad Libs, man. It's like, hey, I fit. That's us.
It's there. It's like publicly, quarterly. Like it's quarterly. And so I guess like sometimes the mantra of just like, yeah, find the decision maker, like is it's kind of like given out, but it is much more complicated than that. Can you talk a little bit about how like that kind of the complexity and that oversimplification of the approach?
That is arguably some of the worst advice that's out there now. I don't know, it's hard to stack up versus like raise as much money as you can and let's see what's other bad advice. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of that's not even mythology, it's just bad advice, right? Because the answer is in these large organizations, there is not just one decision maker. So that there's the fundamental assumption that is built in is wrong. So let's start there. There will be, and it's different. Like, I mean, we're still are in the United States, mostly we're dealing with these businesses. So it's not a consensus decision-making process, but it still kind of is, right? And depending on the corporate culture too, means some people might just be reticent to make any decision at all. I think what you need to find, however, is a champion. There's a difference between a decision maker and a champion. And there's also a difference between a technical champion and a business champion. These two are the actual people that you need to find. And they might be not at equivalent levels in the organization, and you got to feel that out. And so I think the first port of call, and this is actually different than the advice I would have given actually even a couple of years ago. The first port of call, I think, should be your technical champion. Someone who has purchased your system or who understands that gap and who's like, we need to be talking to you. And this can occur in a lot of different ways. And I've seen this, particularly in the business we're building right now. It can be because someone bought your system or your product or your software, or whatever, because they have that need. Cultivate that, go on site. Okay. And even if they're at a junior level, that's fine, because then you can have them elevate that a little bit. And then we'll talk about how you get it there on the business side. Right. The other one is conferences. I've been very surprised, over the past many years now about like the CTO coming and being like, hey, why aren't we talking to you yet? That happens. That happens. And it happens particularly, by the way, if, and again, if you're a startup, listen to these words carefully. It happens when you have the CEOs in the booth all the time. Unless you're meeting with a customer or getting coffee or taking a bathroom break, you need to be in that friggin' booth. Like, get up on your feet and be in that. But there's a reason that you need to be there. And it's for those things. It's for those types of interactions, right? Because that's really where you move things and you're like, let's go sit down and talk about this. I mean, that's how you accelerate business development. Don't find a decision maker. Like, go be like, let's do this right now. Like, let's figure this out. Let's sketch stuff. So I think having a technical advantage is really, really critical. And I would say it's like the Pareto rule, 80% of the business development that I've ever had is because there's been a technical reach out first, from one side or the other, right? And even then, it's generally speaking the startup reaching out to the larger company, because there's just too much noise. They can't find you. Then how do you make that leap? The traditional, like, this would be your distinction between sales and business development. The traditional sales approach would be like, introduce me to your boss, or who's on you can certainly do that on the business development side. They might not. Like these are big companies, right? And so I think what I recommend people do is actually research the way that they frame business development in their organization. Sometimes it's centralized corporate, sometimes it's by business unit. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's by even like product vertical. That is really important that you figure out like how they actually execute these things. And by the way, if they have a partnering program, kind of a priority, right? Equally important, right? And for what it's worth, like that's kind of the dark side of this is like when someone does have a partnering program and then like the startup positions it like they have a special relationship, that's also not right, right? Like it's not a special relationship. But the point is like it shows you that they're willing to do this, right? Your goal was to be in the VIP lane there but figure out the way that the organization is organized. Really important. And LinkedIn will help you out a little bit, but even, kind of, I would say that this is an area where making the site visit is going to be the first site visit is going to be the difference between you figuring this out and not. Because it's much easier, particularly post-COVID, once you've got shoe leather on ground to be like, hey, how do you guys do partnering? Even if it's called business development. How do you guys partner and like who's like how does that organize within your, and then hey, can I just get an introduction to like, it doesn't matter even who it is, and then kind of have them be your trail guide to figure out who's within business development, right? And now you've got the two components. You're still, by the way, this is like you're rounding first base at this point. Now it's time to like bring these two together, right? Like atom smashing is what gives you high energy, right? So now you've got to bring these two together. It's not easy, but it's critical. This is how you get things done. You bring these two together, and then you kind of do the presentation that we discussed, which was like show them what you're going to show them again. Because now you've got someone who can actually move the needle on the business side, and like if needed, create a business case, which is a spreadsheet. Which by the way, like in many cases, you should have done for them, right? If you're the startup, just prepare to do all the homework. Like you're doing the homework. Okay. This is the group. Remember the group project we mentioned earlier? If you're doing a group project, that's what business development is. Assume that you're on the group project that's like made up of 5 people and you're the one person doing the work. That's being a startup. Okay. Just do that. And don't like be guilty, like, oh, I did it. Like, look at me. I created a spreadsheet. No, like that's how this deal is going to get done because you're going to do the work for them. Right. And by the way, that extends to being at the end of these presentations, say, hey, can I get you a proposal or can we talk about a straw man? Or by the way, it's another great area where people use their own semantics. This is another touchy subject in business development. And like, again, something that nobody covers. But I remember talking to a very large company and saying, hey, could I get you a term sheet? And they're like, whoa. And I was like, what? Like, this is just, and they were like, whoa. And I kind of described what I was talking about. They're like, oh, you mean a straw man? I'm like, there's no difference. Like, it's just terms. Like it does, but like, just be aware. Proposal is probably the safe space, but like, hey, can I get your proposal? Just something for us to discuss. And that's how you get things really, really moving. And if you're going to sit there and wait for like big company X to give that to you, you're going to wait a long time. You're going to wait until you die. You need to be the one that picks up the pen and kind of controls both this presentation part of it, but also like driving it forward. And in many ways, even I would add one more thing onto this, which is also explaining why they need to do this and how it fits in their strategy. I'm leaning out of my chair because it's so important. Don't assume that they know what they're doing all the time strategically or why it makes sense. Like tell them, hey, don't tell them I understand your strategy. You should reiterate their strategy and then say, this is how this accelerates your strategy to do the following. Really important because what you're doing in that instance, I'll finish with like, this will be like the capstone on it, is this is what they're going to tell their boss. Because their boss isn't going to give much of a shit around all the other details. They're probably going to be like, okay, that's great. They're sure. But they're going to sign off and they're going to be like, but when they pitch it, they're like, it's going to be quick. It's going to be in the hallway. And they're going to be like, hey, I've got this company and they've got this tap and then the next phrase is going to be exactly what you said. This accelerates what we were talking about the other day on strategy for blah, blah, blah. And they're going to be like, cool. Let me know when you got to go. And then at some point, maybe the last piece is the emerald spice, dating myself, like we'll like throw on is when you can form a relationship with someone that's helped hiring the organization and kind of top down it. I would say be careful with that. Don't overuse that because you're dealing with the busiest, most distracted people in the organization. But if they were compelled early or taking a look at you or join one of the meetings because they want to see what you're up to, realize that that's something that you have, it's in your back pocket, but keep it there until it's needed. And I think that's another thing that people, I've written up like 86 pages of negotiation notes on this. And this is one of the things where things go wrong, which is like where people use that top down too early. Or they don't wait until that critical moment where like deal's kind of on the edge of like, oh, I don't know if we're going to get it done. And then you need them to kind of push it over the edge. This is really important. So anyway, that's hopefully like a good recipe for people who are not just like dreaming about business development, but like, hey, how do I do this?
Yeah. And I talk about that internally at Exceeder too, about like God, like it doesn't have to be the CEO of like a massive organization either. It's just like, think about when you're calling in favors, just generally speaking, like if it feels like you're phoning in a favor, realize like you have there's like a finite amount of times you can go back to the well and draw like, and so just like really think long and hard. Is this where I need a phone? Like, it's kind of like, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Just like, right? It's like you can phone a friend.
Got one.
Yeah, you got one. And make it count. Like, make it count. Don't do it on some frivolous stuff. Like, if you can figure it out on your own, figure it out on your own.
That's all for this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Mike Stadnisky. Tune into part 3 of our conversation to learn more about his journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to having you join us again on the Biotech Startups podcast for part 3 of Mike's journey. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Exceeder provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exceeder.com. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeder or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeder or its guests.